The wails do not cease. The ear-splitting shrieks seem to touch every corner of the kingdom. All of Egypt is engulfed in a blanket of sorrow. It is a day of mourning. The work has stopped. Children do not play. Priests gather in the temples invoking the gods. Help him, guide our Pharaoh, lead him to the field of reeds. Inside the Ibu, preparations have already begun. His mortal body rests on the cold, hard slab, while an experienced embalmer washes his skin with palm wine before rinsing it away with water from the sacred Nile. Outside the tent, mourners continue to moan and cry. The people continue to pray. But inside, there is work to be done. One of the embalmers makes a small vertical incision on the left side of the pharaoh's torso. He carefully removes first the liver, then the lungs, and finally the stomach and intestines. He places them in a golden bowl and hands them to his colleague, who will wash them in the pure river water before filling them with salt. The skilled artisans continue to prepare their king with slow and deliberate movements. The master embalmer feels his hand graze the heart, the vessel of life, center of intelligence and feeling. Adeptly, he pulls away. The heart alone must remain intact. The mighty pharaoh will need it in the afterlife. A third embalmer strides into the Ibu holding a long, thin instrument as he approaches the body. Expertly, he handles a fine chisel, puncturing the small bone separating the nasal cavity and the brain. He then threads his bamboo rod through this tiny hole, careful not to damage the delicate nose. With expert precision, he hooks his instrument into the gelatinous tissue and begins to stir. With just a few flicks of the wrist, he breaks down the useless brain until it is almost liquid. Only then does he methodically pull the bamboo hook out, inch by inch, until it emerges from the nose, bringing the cranium's contents with it. All three embalmers then leave the tent, which is now empty but for the dead pharaoh and his priests. The wizened old men never falter, never stop. They continue to pray, imploring the gods for his safe passage. When the embalmers return, they carry heavy loads of natron. One begins to place sacks of salt within the empty body cavity, using them to dry the corpse from the inside out, while the other two securely enclose the pharaoh in layer upon layer of white crystals until nothing is left uncovered. Here lies the pharaoh, ruler of Egypt, leader of the greatest civilization on earth, and here he shall remain for 40 days and 40 nights, watched over by priests until his earthly body is ready for its divine journey. When the embalmers return, they are pleased with their results. His skin is no longer plump. His cheeks have sunk. They remove all the salt before once more washing their king in the precious Nile water. Then they massage him with oils to keep his skin elastic and strong. The removed organs are returned, dehydrated, and wrapped in linen. The head embalmer carefully replaces them and then begins to stuff the body with linen and aromatic spices. The Ibu smells strongly of perfume, a happy change after 40 days of brine and death. The linen is deliberately placed to recreate the look of life, though the embalmer is shrewd enough to shave off a few of the older ruler's extra pounds, presenting him as he ought to be, not necessarily as he was. Fragrant oil is massaged into the flesh once more. The body is prepared. The embalmers start at the top, carefully wrapping his head and neck with strips of fresh linen. They proceed to follow the king's form, ensuring the fabric is tight, leaving no room for bacteria or bugs to squirm inside and make themselves at home. They do not rush. They let their fingers work nimbly in time with the priest's incantations. No detail is too small. Every finger, every toe is individually treated and wrapped. The priests continue to ward off evil spirits as the embalmers work, watching closely as the skilled craftsmen purposefully place amulets within the wrappings over the pharaoh's heart. An Isis knot for protection, a plummet for balance. Finally, the ruler's arms and legs are tied together, and a beautifully hieroglyphed papyrus scroll featuring spells from the Book of the Dead is placed between the mummy's wrapped hands. Warmed resin is painted over the bandages before a second and then a third layer of linen is secured with this ancient glue. He is now finished. The priests approach the mummified king to perform the opening of the mouth, gently touching his face, giving him the power to speak and eat. A cloth painted with the form of Osiris, god of the underworld, is the final layer before he is lowered into his coffin. And the first coffin then goes into the second. As the weeks have passed, life has resumed. The wails and shrieks have faded. The people began to look to the future. But on this day, the 70th day after their beloved leader's death, the Egyptian people return, ready to lay their pharaoh to rest. And now the real work begins. The mortal embalmers and priests can only do so much. It is time for this pharaoh to start his journey to the underworld. Only Osiris can help him now.
Hey y'all, I'm Erica.
And I'm Caroline. And today we're bringing you another episode of the Pithy Chronicle, History with a Bite.
Better than a soap opera.
Spicier than a ghost pepper.
Sexier, if possible, than Bridgerton.
Our historical retellings are guaranteed to entertain.
We're here to prove that history is just another reality show, except unscripted.
So let's open up the book and jump in. And the time it takes you to drive to work, we promise to fascinate, surprise, and enlighten you.
All you have to do is listen.
Are you hungry yet? Welcome back, listeners. This week, we are taking a peek under the linen wrappings and exploring the ins and outs of mummification.
Caroline, it is the beginning of the episode. We have barely begun. How are you going to do all of these puns right at the start?
I can't help it. So just grab a shovel, Erica, and let's dig in.
Oh my god, you're killing me.
Excellent. Then you'll be ready for mummification.
Alright, fine. Lay it on me.
Okay, where to start? First and foremost, mummification isn't an Egypt-only phenomenon. Many cultures across the world practiced mummification. In fact, mummies can be found on every continent except Antarctica. Though, if you were to die there, it would be incredibly easy to mummify you because you'd instantly freeze and be preserved, like leftover spaghetti sauce.
You did not.
I did. But Egypt is certainly the most iconic, likely the most familiar to most of our listeners, and therefore I'm going to frame a lot of today's episode through comparison with Egypt. One is not better than the other, it's just the most accessible reference.
Yeah, I really think most of us picture the traditional Egyptian sarcophagus when we think of a mummy. But if mummification was so prevalent, why do we only think of the Egyptian mummies?
The simple answer is that they are the most visually striking. By the New Kingdom period of Egyptian history, approximately 1550 to 1050 BCE, scholars agree that mummification had reached its pinnacle.
And a pinnacle mummy is defined by most intact, most attractive, least stinky, best dressed.
I think that least stinky would be an essential.
For me, at least.
For me, too. But in this case, pinnacle is determined as the best preserved, the most lifelike dead body. The Egyptian mummies that we have today give us a very good idea of what the deceased actually looked like in life. And that was essential because Egyptians believed their soul or spirit lived on after their mortal death. And this essence of themselves was split into three parts: the Ka, the Ba, and the Ack. The Ka is the double of the deceased. It would always remain in the tomb and act as like a home base for the spirit. It was the body or the mummy itself. The Ba was something like our modern interpretation of a soul. It was free to leave the tomb, go and do things, and then come on back. But to do this, it had to find its Ka, or mummified body. So the more lifelike the mummy, the better chance the Ba would be able to find its way home. And the final piece was the Ack, which is more akin to a spirit in today's vernacular. It was the part that traveled through the underworld, making the perilous journey to the Field of Reeds, which was kind of an eternal paradise that was actually a mirror of their own mortal life.
It's just a mirror of their mortal life, not richer, not more powerful, not nicer, not kinder, nothing.
No, by all accounts, based on the hieroglyphs that we find in the tombs, Egyptians really loved their life here on Earth. They happily overlooked the hardships of day-to-day life and embraced their family, friends, loved ones, and lived life to the fullest, appreciating the special moments, big and small. They wanted to live their current life just forever.
How very chicken noodle soup for the soul.
It really is. It's nice and warm and brothy. I think that we could all take a page out of the Egyptians' Book of the Dead. But in order for any of this to happen, the body needed to stay intact.
And lifelike, of course.
Exactly. Very lifelike. Like most crafts, and honestly, that's what this was, a craft. Embalmers.
Like arts and crafts?
No, like artisan craft.
Okay, because it sounds like arts and crafts.
No, not popsicle sticks and pom-poms. No glue guns for these people.
Oh god, I love a glue gun.
They probably would have liked a glue gun, though. That would have been a lot easier than heating up the resin. Anyway, crafts in the formal sense of the word. And that's what this was, because embalmers were artisans, highly skilled, highly trained, and very well versed in human anatomy. So, like most crafts, it developed over time. The first mummies were likely accidents, bodies that were preserved in the dry, arid climate of the Egyptian desert. Then they evolved. First, the deceased were dismembered, defleshed.
Ugh, that's a terrible word.
It really is. Defleshed. Anyway.
Oh god, you made it worse.
You're welcome.
Defleshed worse.
It takes skills, Erica. It takes talent. They were dismembered, defleshed, and wrapped in linen. Eventually, they adopted the technique of desiccation, using salt or alcohol to remove all the liquid and prevent decomposition. It took centuries, maybe even millennia, for mummification to be perfected and eventually become a religious requirement, not just a person's preferred choice of internment. In fact, more than that, it really became a business. Much like funeral homes of today, you could visit the embalmers and look at the options.
Stop.
Do you want to pay? No, you could. This is real. This is real, folks. All right. Do you want to pay more for the brain to be removed via the hook up the nose? Or would it be okay to make a few holes in the skull and pull it out in chunks? How many layers of linen would you like? Canopic jars to hold the removed internal organs? Or would you like them preserved individually and returned to the body? And in case you found these decisions overwhelming, not to worry, they had wooden models to represent the different techniques.
Oh, this is amazing and right up my alley. I already have my funeral planned.
Oh, God. Oh, wait till we get to the end then, girl. I got a question for you.
Can't wait. I can already tell you it involves bagpipes.
Okay, I like it. All right.
Okay, sorry. So back to the real question. Was everyone mummified? Was this kind of just for a certain class or an expected conclusion for all members of society?
No, you're right. It was based on class. Mummification was expensive. While the notion of ka, ba, and ach was pervasive throughout, the financial ability to keep one's remains perfectly intact forever wasn't for everyday people. It was reserved for royals, noble families, government officials, the wealthy.
So, do we think all Egyptians loved their lives then, or just those wealthy enough to pay for the privilege of preserving it?
Oof, you're getting all philosophical on me. I'm sure there was a vast array, and I'm positive there were skeptics out there. And I know human nature meant that, of course, they wanted more, just like we do today. I really can't answer for the everyday Egyptian. I can say that the representations of their lives are generally very happy and very fulfilled. But again, who got to have representations? The wealthy. What I can say for sure is that after more than 2,000 years of intentional mummification, the practice did die out as the Egyptian culture became more and more assimilated into the Roman culture, into the Roman Empire. And then, with the introduction of Christianity, mummification ceased altogether.
It's almost sad that such an integral part of their culture just disappeared.
I agree. It is still what the country of Egypt is most known for, 2 millennia later. And, I mean, that's an amazing thing to think about. But if the goal was to be immortal, remembered, or easily identified, in some ways, they are still kind of succeeding.
Heck yeah, they are. And if something someone did 2,000 years ago is still, like, pumping your tourism industry, heck yeah, good for you.
That's a win for the national economy right there.
Win for the economy.
Oh my.
That's a big return on investment.
Massive return on investment. Yes. But, as I said, Egypt wasn't alone. It wasn't even the first. Mummification was global, and it had been around a long time.
All right, don't keep a girl waiting. It's not polite, Caroline. Give me the details.
All right, so the oldest known mummy was actually found here in North America in modern-day Fallon, Nevada, which is actually not very far from where I live in California.
Where Top Gun is?
It, in fact, is where Top Gun is. So have you listened to Suleiman and Hurrem? I have just made a nice little 6 degrees of separation. So, it was commonly known as the spirit cave mummy. It was naturally preserved by the heat and arid conditions of the cave in which it was found, wrapped in a woven mat. Radiocarbon dating puts it at, can you guess?
Well, if it's more than 2,000, I'm just gonna say 3,500?
10,000 years old.
Oh my god.
Maybe more.
Oh lordy.
That's 5,000 years before the very first Egyptian mummies.
Okay, but what do we know else about it? Like, what's the culture? Why was it preserved in the cave? Why does it have to be so daggone hot in Nevada?
I think there are meteorologists that could answer that question better. But I do wish that I had better answers, as I'm sure all historians do. What I can tell you is that they were able to sequence this man's DNA. They sequenced 10,000-year-old DNA and determined that he was related to contemporary Native Americans. And after years of dispute, the U.S. government finally returned the mummy to the Paiute Shoshone tribe of Nevada's Fallon Reservation.
Look at that repatriation!
I love that they've returned it. It was quite a to-do, but they did eventually. I think it was 2016.
Well, good for them.
Good for them. But the oldest culture of mummification that we can really expand upon and explore is the Chinchorro people from the Camarines Valley of Chile and southern Peru. And it's there that we have found the oldest deliberately interred mummies, not happy accidents. This area of the world is one of the driest places on Earth, which means I would never live there. Not good for my skin. And it facilitates mummification.
I was going to say, well, shouldn't that be good for mummification? Shouldn't that keep those...
It is excellent for preserving that face. Yes. It is excellent for the skin of the mummified, just not for the living.
Just not for the living.
Great for the dead, it's bad for the living. Exactly. The Chinchorro were a coastal people who began to mummify their dead about 7,000 years ago. And that is still 2,000 years before the Egyptians started to do so.
And yet I've never heard of them.
It's amazing. I hadn't either. So, here's the sitch. Unlike the Egyptians, these mummies were preserved to allow the living a connection with their dead. Some even kept these mummies in their homes, and they were often included in festivals and remained a large part of the family's lives even after death.
Oh my god, in the home. In the home! I'm really stuck on that nugget. I mean, I realize they're their loved ones, but no. Even in ancient times, mummies were not a good interior design choice. They're not a good choice now, and they weren't then.
No, please don't put a mummy in your living room. It's not cool. It would not be my first choice, but mummification was a part of their daily life. All of society was mummified, including infants, even fetuses.
Oh, that is just not the done thing.
You don't think so? You don't like having a mummified fetus?
No. No.
Why shouldn't the babies in the fetusi be mummified?
I don't want to see it.
Well, my goal by the end of this podcast is to make someone believe this episode, not the whole podcast, I don't have time for that, is to make at least a few people out there believe that mummies aren't so ick.
I mean, ick, maybe not, but like...
Based on your face, I have yet to succeed with you, but I'm still working. Just give me time.
Just not in the house.
Just not in the house. Okay, I am down with not in the house.
It's not a dog.
Outside. Take that outside. The Chinchorro had 4 distinct styles of mummification. Their oldest mummies were natural mummies, happy accidents. But it can be conjectured that these unintentional mummies sparked the culture's interest. The first intentional mummifications were black mummies, named for the black manganese painted over the finished corpses. I don't really want to get bogged down in all of the nitty-gritty, but here is the basic technique. And Erica, since I know how much you enjoy this, would you please read it?
They disassembled the person's body, treated each part individually, and then reassembled it. Okay, that's smart. The head, arms, and legs were removed. The skin was removed. The internal organs were removed too. The body was heat-dried and the flesh completely stripped from the bone using stone tools. Okay, I'm going to stick with this, but I'm really wondering why all of it's removed. It seems counterintuitive, but okay. The bones were dried over coal. Once reassembled, the corpse was covered in white ash paste, which was also used to recreate lost facial features. Okay, alright, cool.
Making them look the way they did in life, you know.
Give me some good cheekbones, please.
That's right.
Sometimes sticks were inserted into the arms and legs to retain their shape, and then the skin was refitted onto the body. That's really intense. Anyway, The skin was refitted, sometimes in smaller pieces, sometimes in one almost whole piece. That would be impressive.
I thought the same. I don't want to like watch it, but I kind of am amazed that they could possibly do that.
Yeah. It's not like a rabbit you can skin like that. You know, you can make like one nice incision in a rabbit and pull the whole thing off.
I think maybe you can, but I feel that we've gone down a dark road. Continue.
We have. We're not Dexter here. So if the skin was unusable, there are examples of sea lion skin being substituted or added. It was then painted with the characteristic black manganese, and many mummies featured clay masks and wigs. And then they plopped on the couch to hang out.
Yeah, something like that. I think that they removed the skin so that they could fully dry the bones, which is an interesting way to do it. But the black mummies did evolve to the red mummies, which, as you may have guessed, were named for the red ochre that was painted over the finished corpses. Naturally. And the red mummies were similarly dried, but they were not disassembled. So you'll be happy to know it's a little bit less. Instead, there were several incisions made to take out the internal organs, but the head was still cut off so that they could access and remove the brain. And the skin was pasted back on and completely covered with a red clay mask. The wig was also back, but this time it was attached with like a little hat made of black clay that kind of held it in place. And then they painted the face. The fourth and final phase is termed mudcoat mummies. And interestingly, they no longer remove the organs for these mummies. The bodies were just completely covered in a thick coat of mud, sand, and some sort of binder like an egg, maybe fish glue. And this process had one really big plus. No more desiccating mummy smell.
Who would have thought any kind of fish glue would eliminate a smell?
That's a very valid point.
I mean, it's definitely an upgrade, and I'm not complaining, but
yeah, there's other smells. But these mummies were actually really cemented into their graves. I don't think they were couch mummies, if you will.
That was a trend that needed to leave.
It was, but I hate to tell you that I don't think the reason was an aesthetic choice. More plausibly, they discovered the association between disease and rotting corpses.
You know what? Sometimes aesthetic pays off. You know?
It does. And of course, they also had exposure to outside communities and new cultures that may have influenced them as well. We really can't know for sure, but what we do know is that the Andean climate, as we've already discussed, lent itself to mummification. And our next culture that we're going to take a look at took this concept to a whole new level.
Oh, I love new levels. Who is it?
The Incas.
Love it!
Inca mummies are unique. The dead were not preserved for eternal life like the Egyptians, nor were they kept as memories of the past like the chinchorro. Instead, they were symbols of power.
Okay, that's different.
Very different. When the first Spaniards reached Cusco, the capital of the Inca Empire, they found golden temples glittering in the sun, their architecture and grandeur rivaling that of contemporary European cities. But wow, were they surprised when they entered the inner sanctums to find two women wearing golden masks waving fans to keep the flies off of their emperor and his wife.
I mean, I wouldn't hate that. It's the hot Peruvian summer. Please, fan me.
I absolutely agree. But interestingly, this emperor and his wife were dead.
Ugh.
Oh. But through mummification, their family members kept them, quote-unquote, alive, and the family acted as interpreters for their dead relatives, benefiting from their wealth and status. During holy festivals, powerful mummies were brought out as a show of support for the current leadership. The living emperor marched first, followed by a parade of his ancestor mummies. You know, as they do. And they were known as the Illapa.
I mean, that's a good party, man, I guess.
More food for the alive people. More food for the living.
Yeah, listen, that is a very effective budgeting strategy. You've got plenty of people.
The bodies fill the room.
But the buffet stays stocked.
You could even do an open bar with that. Yes, so this party was hopping. The Inca Empire dominated Peru from 1400 to 1533 CE. It continued to grow and grow and grow. And this was because important mummies were still considered alive after their death. So when one emperor died, his successor took over the ruler's leadership, but not his possessions.
So they could give orders and control the military, but not live in the metaphorical castle?
Basically, yeah. The deceased emperor's family kept watch over his preserved body and made sure that he was kept in the luxury that he deserved, even in death. I also think that they kept themselves in that luxury, as one does.
I deserve luxury and death.
Okay, I'll
You'll let my family know?
I'll let your family know. Thus, each new Inca emperor had to travel/conquer farther and farther afield in order to stake his own claim to make his fortune, if you will.
You know, that's not a bad way to expand your empire.
It's not. It worked pretty well, and these emperors were motivated because they needed the gold. So they plundered and pillaged. They claimed not only gold, silver, shells, and pretty feathers. They also took mummies.
Ooh, were they like taking people's power by taking the mummies? Oh,
You are so good! Yes, they were!
It's like the Assyrians taking other people's gods when they...
Exactly. It's just like that. Excellent.
I love a connection.
Mummification for the Inca preserved not only the body, but its power. So by taking powerful mummies from various tribes, they were claiming control of the mummies' people.
I mean, that's one heck of a power move. We own you, we own your stuff, we own your past, and we got your power.
Totally. The Inca were very successful conquerors, in large part because they understood the importance of this ancestral relationship, and they used these intrinsic connections to their advantage. They claimed to be honoring the dead of these conquered tribes, but in reality, they were bringing these powerful people back to the capital as a type of collateral or prisoner. So, when the Illapa were brought out and all assembled for ceremonial occasions, the reigning emperor would then take his place among them, sitting stone-like, pretending to be dead, surrounded by his powerful dead ancestors whose very presence granted him their authority. She's speechless.
And I am so rarely speechless.
It's true.
Awkward seating arrangement, like... Can you imagine making that seating
Do you
chart?
do it by the first ancestor is closest to you, or is it the last one that was deceased? How do you arrange? I don't know.
Yeah, like what is the power structure?
What does Emily Post say?
I don't know. Emily Post skipped this, and I feel like I need to know this. And what about all these mummies they've stolen?
So they're included. I mean, these conquest dead relatives are lending their power to said Iapa as well.
But, like, where do they go?
They're by the kitchen and the bathrooms.
Oh!
It's another power
God.
move within a power
Just
move.
such an image. I'm just gonna sit here stone-like I'm dead. Get the visual, guys. That would never happen in Western Europe.
No, I don't think so. No. And to be fair, the Spanish really struggled with this. They were very confused. But once they realized the incredible influence that these dead ancestors held, the Spanish conquistadors became unsettled. And one in particular, Gonzalo Pizarro, brother to the famous conquistador Francisco Pizarro, looted one of the most august mummies' homes, stealing gold and other precious items, and then he set the dead/living man on fire.
Was there a mummy-like curse? Like in the Egyptian tombs? Because there should be. That's just rude. You don't come into somebody's house and do that. That's rude.
You don't burn them down in their own house. Agreed. I did not hear anything about a curse. We'll get to curses. We will get there. So, yes. Pizarro here was, in fact, desecrating a holy site and murdering a powerful leader because, he was still technically alive to the people. His family, whose sole responsibility was to look after this man post-mortem, collected his ashes, and they actually still considered him to be animate.
So, in effect, they considered him not just desecrated, but burned alive.
Yep. That's it. I don't know if they humanized the dead with feelings and nerve endings, but considering they gave food and drink to the dead, one just has to assume this was bad. And after this, the Inca began to hide their noble mummies. They didn't want the Spanish to do this again. But the Spanish, being interested in conversion as well as gold, really just didn't approve of this cult-like ancestral worship. So in 1559, they confiscated all the dead royals, and they haven't been seen since.
Oh, so this is like a mummy mystery.
It is a mummy mystery. There is something about mummies and mysteries and murders. They all kind of go together. Which brings me to a separate group of Inca mummies. Unlike the noble mummies that are missing, these mummies have been found and studied. And in fact, several of them are claimed to be the best preserved mummies ever found.
Well, that's exciting. I'm sure scientists are thrilled to get their hands on such monumental material.
Oh, absolutely. These mummies reveal extraordinary details about the Incas' diet, lifestyle, health, textiles, rituals. They are a wealth of information, but they're also quite sad.
I mean, all of this is sad, obviously.
Okay, yeah, but these mummies are those of young children who were sacrificed.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I'm sorry. These mummies were found high up in the mountains, perfectly preserved in sub-freezing temperatures. In fact, they represent the highest tombs ever found on Earth. These children, these sacrifices, were known as kapakoka, and they were a key component of Inca celebrations. The children were considered pure, worthy of giving to the gods. And once sacrificed, the children themselves would then be worshipped.
Okay, so how did they decide which children to murder? I can't imagine people were lining up for this chance.
I read a few things that said that nobles wanted their children to be chosen a few years ago, but I could not find that again when I went looking for this episode. So, what I found for the most part was that these children were tribute payments.
How Hunger Games of them.
Very, and just wait, it's eerie. These tributes were usually 12 to 16 years old. They were taken from across the empire and brought to the capital where they were well fed, sometimes for the very first time in their lives, impressively dressed, and then drugged with cocaine and alcohol, likely to calm them down because, impending doom isn't exactly fun. Seemingly, they were groomed for about 6 to 8 weeks before their inevitable demise.
Does cocaine make you calm?
It does seem counterintuitive. I think maybe the alcohol helped. But they were so drugged that it's believed that they were almost unconscious by the time they were actually sacrificed.
Well, thank God for small mercies.
I totally agree.
This is totally the Hunger Games. I mean, may the odds be ever in your favor.
Sadly, I don't think any of them had good odds. There was no victor. They didn't get to win this. They were offered to the gods on high holidays, imperial birthdays, and military victories. They were also sacrificed as a way to appease during times of natural disasters. One of the most famous examples that we have is lovingly called Juanita, or the Lady of Ampato, which is the dormant volcano on which she was discovered. Time magazine chose her as one of the world's top 10 discoveries ever, because she was found entirely frozen, which perfectly preserved her internal organs, her hair, her blood, her skin, her stomach contents. The wealth of information that she revealed about the mysterious Inca Empire is really hard to overstate. Her blood work indicates that she was highly intoxicated just before her death, almost in a psychological state, nearly unconscious. She was then killed by blunt force trauma to the head, evidenced by a cracked right eye socket and a large skull fracture.
Oh, that sounds like she saw it coming. They just whacked her in the face? Can't we find a nicer way to kill her?
I had the same thought. I mean, she's a child. It doesn't matter. You know what? There's just no good way to make this sound good. Don't do this to people.
If they were drugging them so much, why couldn't
it be from behind so they didn't see it coming? It's a small mercy. But no, they didn't. And this type of brutal sacrifice was a key component of Incan life.
All right, this delve into Incan mummification hasn't been all that pleasant. Thank you, Caroline.
Sorry.
Have you got any less depressing mummies? Or is that even like a thing? Is it just like a total contradiction here?
I think that happy mummies are a little bit of a contradiction. Although, again, Egypt, these mummies were happy to be there because they were just going to live their same life forever. But I do have something else for you, yes. So let's voyage west, across the South Pacific Ocean to Papua New Guinea, where the Anga clan continues to celebrate their mummified ancestors even today.
Oh, like, still some modern mummies. Okay, not pleasant, but fascinating. Go on.
The Anga people mummify their dead as a way to communicate with them. A bit like visiting a Western cemetery and leaving flowers, saying a prayer, maybe having a little chat.
Well, that's not terribly awful. It's much better than child sacrifice, and it's a little sweet.
It's a very different situation. It's a much nicer situation. The Anga also use a very different method of mummification. They scrape the bodies with a bristly plant, and then they put the deceased in a smoke-filled hut for 30 days. The smoking helps to kill all the bacteria and prevent insects from laying their eggs. And then the arsenic in the smoke also acts as an excellent preservative. And then a bamboo pipe is used as an anal spigot.
Oh my god! Oh my god! I never thought those words would be uttered in my presence.
I'm sorry to offend. But yeah, I had a very similar reaction. But this anal spigot evacuates all of the gut contents. And then to release the rest of the bodily fluids, they poke holes in the hands and feet, which are then massaged by the villagers. Finally, the bodies are slathered in ochre, which further dehydrates the body.
So do these relatives hang out in the living room too? They're just chilling, watching TV with everybody?
I don't think so, no. Fortunately for Erica's sensitivities, they sit on a sheltered cliff overlooking the village.
Right where they should be.
Right where they should be. But, problematically, they are beginning to deteriorate. Which is scary, as the Anga believe, quote, great people whose bodies are not taken care of will roam the jungle as spirits and sabotage hunting or crops.
Oh, no. I don't want any unhappy mummy ghost roaming anywhere, but especially not a jungle.
No, the jungle needs to be free of roaming mummies. So, in 2008, researchers Ronald Beckett and Andrew Nelson went to Papua New Guinea to assist the locals with restoration and hoped to teach the Anga how to better preserve their own ancestors. They used bark cloth called tapa to patch and support body parts, like dislocated jaws. They heated sap from the humaca tree to use as glue, and they made a lime-based succa from crushed shells to kill lichens within the corpse. And then they touched up the ochre clay coverings. According to Beckett, the leader was, quote, very pleased. He started to cry, he started to sing, he started to dance. He took my hand.
That seems very nice.
I think so too. And now the Anga are free of any angry ancestors who may roam the jungle.
I do really like the imagery of the ancestors sitting atop a high cliff, watching over their descendants. It's a little creepy, but you know what? It's still very lovely.
All right. Well, this brings me to my biggest question that I've been turning over in my mind throughout my time with the mummies. Why exactly are mummies creepy?
And do you have an answer?
I want you to answer. This is for you. Erica's answer. Why are mummies creepy?
You'll have to give me a sec.
She's thinking.
I feel like there is a question of cleanliness. Yes, I recognize that they have been preserved. I mean, they are either salted like a fish or they are roasted like a piece of pork. But I don't keep fish and pork, however salted or however roasted, in my kitchen very long.
Okay. All right. All right.
This is...
Okay.
Eventually, these things, no matter how well cooked or preserved...
I am loving that I ask you why mummies are creepy, and you respond that they're not edible anymore. Best to certain sell-by date.
Well, it's not that they're not edible.
I know, it's not that you're gonna eat it, obviously.
No, I mean,
that
just think a bit about, like...
they're gonna go bad.
They're gonna go bad, and eventually, if you leave that pork or fish sitting out, you know...
And we're back to the pork and the fish.
I'm telling you, you're gonna get flies.
The Inca had an answer. They had those little fans wafting away the flies.
Anyway, so
Erica's answer is mummification is creepy because it is gross. Is that like the gist?
I don't think it's gross, but I think it definitely... There is a cleanliness issue.
Okay, so it's a cleanliness issue.
Long term. I think on a more philosophical level, for me at least, it would hinder me from moving on with my everyday life, right?
Interesting.
It would keep me pretty grounded in that grief if I had to look at my deceased loved one every day.
Every day. I think that's a valid answer. I'm not sure that it's an answer to the question of creepy, but I see it as an answer to why you wouldn't mummify in general.
And it's not even that mummify, it's just I wouldn't have it on my couch.
I think we're all in agreement that couch mummies are out. Those are for Halloween only. Which brings me to the fact that Halloween is in large part to blame for such ghoulish associations with mummification and why it is associated with the macabre in today's society. But in my opinion, which is evidently quite different from Erica's, mummies are scary because they are usually coupled with magic or ghosts. Egyptian mummies were often accompanied by texts calling the spirit back to the dead body. They were given a book of spells, which we now know was part of this life-happy religion where everything was excellent, and that the body, the Ka, was to be visited by the soul, the Ba, and just needed a way to find home. Not scary, just really practical.
But also, if someone comes into my house and bothers me, I'm going to retaliate.
All right, we'll get to the curses. For the Chinchorro, it was a way to remain connected with their loved ones, a sentiment I think that we can all identify with. And for the Inca, it was power. It's not exactly heartwarming, but it's not super scary.
Yeah, I don't know that I would call child sacrifice heartwarming.
Okay, I did say it wasn't heartwarming, but yes, no, fair play. The Capacoca, or sacrificial children, are scary. But not the mummies themselves.
But wait. This is a good one. Does the thought of a child mummy not terrify you?
Well, but see, why? These were innocent children, and it's
of
their
course
fate.
They are, but if you're an innocent child and you're murdered on top of a mountain after being drugged with...
So your scary association is them coming back to life.
Listen, obviously they're not going to be corporeal, but you think that kid's not going to be like, I got some unfinished business?
Okay. I was going to say that the innocent children were in fact not scary, and it was their fate that really scares us, but Erica's version is quite horrifying, actually.
Exactly.
So, I think, and I think you will agree with this, that the association between mummies and the macabre really begins with King Tut, or Tutankhamun, to be formal, because, we're not on first name terms.
He hadn't bought you dinner and taken you home yet?
He has not bought me dinner, taken me home yet. Goodness, I'm a married woman, Erica. His tomb was discovered by legendary archaeologist Howard Carter in 1922. It was an unbelievably exciting excavation because, unlike most royal tombs, it was untouched. No grave robbers had absconded with the gold and gems. Everything was there in all its splendor and glory. But soon after the excavation, rumors began to circulate. Rumors of a curse, a deadly spell that would fell anyone who disturbed the pharaoh's eternal slumber.
Oh, now this makes me want to get my pumpkin spice candle out and get ready for Halloween. It was true, though, to some extent, right? Weren't there, like, a number of suspicious deaths after the tomb was opened?
Your excitement is horrifying and lovely at the same time.
It's so wonderful!
There were 2 deaths, yes. So 4 months after the discovery, Lord Carnarvon, the financial backer for the expedition, died.
See, that's spooky.
Well, yeah, but he died of blood poisoning from an infected mosquito bite. A weird death, sure. A bit quirkier than a heart attack or a stroke, but not unreasonable considering the tomb's environs.
And you don't think that that's suspicious? You don't think that there's a connection or that, like...
Okay, the timing is a little suspicious. And then there was the second death, that of the radiologist who first looked at the sarcophagus. But in general, the majority of this very large crew, including Carter himself, survived and lived to tell the tale for many years to come. I actually read that the average age of death for all involved with the expedition was 70, which is really not too shabby.
I mean...
She looks so mad at my fact. It's just a fact. I didn't make it up.
And I'm sure Hollywood has not helped mummies' reputations.
It's certainly not with you. No, I can see that.
There is something exciting about the agency that's still left, even with a body, a mummy, to say, you know, you've pissed me off and you've done something you shouldn't have. I'm coming for you.
You are going down the Brendan Fraser mummy movie path with its many sequels that portray these evil mummies that return for power and vengeance.
I don't know that I think they're evil, but yeah, I think that they probably want some vengeance. Gosh darn it, I just want to sleep in my afterlife and enjoy my life exactly as it was when I was alive.
All right, fair enough. Well, I agree that the concept of a returned mummy looking for vengeance would be very scary. But it was a far cry from the original purpose, which was just to live a happy life forever and ever. I like to think that mummies might be moving in a new direction with representations like that of Akhmun-Ra, which was obviously based on King Tut in the film Night at the Museum, which I will admit that I know by heart because it is currently my son's favorite movie. But it was a refreshing presentation of a pharaoh who is kind, wants the best for his people, and shares his otherworldly magic and reincarnation with all of his little museum friends. So I think mummies are going in a nice, new, happier direction. But for me personally, the reason I don't particularly like mummies is because I am claustrophobic. I think the concept of being completely wrapped in tight linen with no room for air or bugs or bacteria, unable to move even as a dead body, is extremely frightening. The mystical, magical, ghostly realm of mummies is not a problem for me, but the physical restraints makes me queasy just thinking about it.
Really? See, I think of it as like a weighted blanket.
Nope, don't like those either.
I'm a Southern woman. I haven't stepped out of the house without Lycra on my thighs since I was, 14?
Okay. I rebelled. My mother tried desperately, and I was like, heck no.
I don't know that the tight wrapping would be an issue for me.
It's personal, and obviously I had not considered their sell-by date as you had.
So I think you're advocating that mummification is just another way to preserve time with the dead and doesn't need to or mean to be scary. Really similar to standard funeral practices today. It seems to me like it's quite similar in intent, and maybe that makes the idea of mummification less scary or maybe less foreign.
That is certainly my take and something I would like to present as an option to folks like you who find mummies even less appealing. It's not that I want to look at mummies, it's just that they don't scare me.
I mean, they don't scare me. I've touched one.
Why?
Why?
What mummy have you touched?
Oh, have I not told you this?
No.
Okay, so don't put this one in there.
I'm not going to because it sounds illegal.
It probably was, because I was also in Russia.
Oh,
When we were doing the stuff, we got to go to their restoration center and do a couple of quick, easy things on some of the pieces that they were working on at the time, just to see how it went.
Okay.
And one of them was a mummy, and while no one was looking, I touched it.
What did it feel like?
Very dry.
Great job. Done.
Done.
Anyway, embalming as we know it today began during the Civil War and was actually encouraged by President Lincoln. Preserving the bodies in the short term allowed lost soldiers to be returned to their hometowns and for loved ones to have proper sentimental burial. Funeral homes use formaldehyde as a relatively quick and efficient way of preserving the body and preventing decomposition. It is not a permanent prevention of decay like mummification, but it is intended to give friends and family a few extra days to gather, to celebrate, to say goodbye. But in terms of a professional craftsman preparing a body for death through artificial means, it is very similar. All right, Erica, because this subject was so vast and encompassed the whole globe, I want to give our listeners a few basic facts to really sink their teeth into and keep with them. So would you please do the honors?
Again, reluctantly, but yes.
Yes, she's going to.
I will.
She'll do it.
Mummies are old dead bodies
Obvious. Just keep going.
that retain soft tissue because either by accident or human intervention, bacteria and fungi aren't able to grow and cause decay. Mummies can be made by dehydration because bacteria and fungi can't live without water.
And this is seen in the Egyptian style of mummies. They just got rid of all the water so that nothing could live there.
Fair enough. Freezing, again, not good for bacteria or fungi.
And one of the most poignant examples of frozen mummifications is Mount Everest. Known as the Rainbow Valley for the multicolored hiking gear of the parish, it is estimated that 200 plus bodies, or mummies, dot the snow just before the summit on the northeast ridge.
Oh.
So they are in fact, oh my, your face.
No, this little factoid is terrifying. We're in the modern age. Can we not get an airplane up there to, get these people down?
Getting them down is exorbitantly expensive. To get these bodies would take so much effort, and they can't fly the planes up there. But no, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars to recover individual bodies. So some have been recovered, but not many. Moving on.
Lastly, asphyxiation. If there's no oxygen, then there's no life, and nothing can decompose.
So the peat bogs of the UK are a really great example of this kind of mummification. They were likely Celtic or Germanic contemporaries to the Romans, and these mummified bodies of the bogs are very well preserved, and we can actually see evidence of their violent deaths, which mean that they were perhaps part of some sort of ritual sacrifice. I don't believe they were mummified with the intent of keeping said ritual sacrifice. It's just that the bogs had no oxygen.
Yeah, those bogs are kind of terrifying.
They are. I don't want to get stuck in one. No, thank you.
Me either. Mummification was widely practiced across the globe and most frequently honored the deceased. Mummies have been found in China, Alaska, Japan, Florida, Italy, and the Canary Islands.
Oh. Before we move on, I have to talk about the people of the Canary Islands called the Guanches, because they are a fascinating culture that is now extinct. And if we had more time, I would have loved to delve into these mummies that were preserved in caves, in large part because they are the most likely source of medicinal mumia, or pulverized mummy, that was commonly used in Islamic and European medicine up until the 20th century. This is a huge rabbit hole, I know, but I could not help it because mummy medicine. Sorry, continue.
That
Erica.
is fascinating. That's like people eating their placenta.
It's very similar, and it was a very common prescription, basically.
Huh.
And they would also take Egyptian mummies, but that was a much further distance. The Canary Islands were far closer.
Well, and too, maybe they're not as good for you if you're not Egyptian. Maybe I shouldn't eat someone else's placenta.
Please don't eat someone else's placenta. That's all I have to say about
Well,
that.
that's my point, right? Like, maybe.
Frankly, most of what's left is just bone and skin and linen. Anyway.
I think this is a pretty good bridge into the ethical issues surrounding the study of mummies. Like, did you get into that at all, or is it too big of a rabbit hole?
I mean, that is a black hole, not a rabbit hole. But the facts are that intentional mummies were created as part of a religious ceremony. Their preserved bodies were intended to be kept, be entombed, be celebrated forever. And therefore, destroying them or examining them and thereby removing them from their resting places is very controversial. There's no denying that archaeologists are indeed disturbing graves. But on the flip side, we learn so much from them. They actually speak to us. Hundreds and thousands of years later, mummies tell us about themselves, about their culture, their religion, their values, their health, their diet, their drug use. They give us such insight into often extinct cultures and civilizations. Is it worth the price? I'm not going to comment on that because I don't want angry people. But Erica, what do you think?
Oh, so I get to comment on...
You get the angry people.
I get the angry people. This is a good one.
It's a hard question.
It's a hard question.
As historians, we both really want to know these answers. We want to know about their culture. And I think
But as a museum professional...
It's a no-go. So yeah, it's a rough call.
It's a rough call, and especially because so many have been disturbed already. I feel like at some point we have to draw a line to where we say, this is not an ethical practice. We're no longer going to do it. We're going to use what we have already. We have a ton of stuff in archives, back in restoration. There's so much to do and get done and use before we say, hey, we need new material.
I can see that. I also really like the technological approach because as technology continues to expand and innovate, it allows us things like X-rays, which makes it possible to study these mummies without destroying their religious wrappings.
If you can study them in that way and in their place without disturbing them, and without taking them away from their cultural home, from their burial place, I think that's a different conversation.
I agree. I hope that technology continues to allow us to approach mummies with a newfound respect and more of an ethical method of gathering information.
Well, and my gosh, if we can synthesize DNA from something that's over 10,000 years old.
Yeah, exactly. All right, before we leave these mummies in peace, Erica, I would love to give our listeners a little rundown of 5 of the most famous mummies in the world.
Oh, you know I love a good top 5.
All right, here we go.
So first up, we have Tutankhamun, or King Tut. His tomb's discovery sparked the international interest in Egyptology and mummies. His tomb offered the modern world its first full glimpse of Egyptian splendor and funerary practices.
Number 2.
Ötzi, the European Iceman. Tourists discovered his remains as well as his clothing and effects in 1991 in the Italian Alps. Wow, this is recent. His body was wonderfully preserved by the ice and snow, and he is an ideal exemplar of the Copper Age, carrying loads of tools and weapons. He even had a proto-first aid kit. Wow.
Right.
Around age 45 when he died, he was murdered. But by who? Another mummy mystery.
Love those. All right, number 3.
Ramses II. Often proclaimed as Egypt's most powerful pharaoh, he lived to be over 90 years old. Wow.
Which is more than double the average lifespan.
That's old.
So when we're thinking, were the pharaohs enjoying life more than the average people? Well, if they could live to double the age, yeah, probably so. Mm-hmm.
Well, and it seems like he had a real good time because he fathered more than 100 children.
Woo-hoo.
Woohoo! So he was entombed in the Valley of the Kings. I mean, God, the succession crisis.
Yes, I know. Better him than me.
Better him than me. Ancient Egyptian priests secretly moved his body to thwart looters, which is pretty smart. Mm-hmm. He was found in 1881 along with a cache of 50 other royal and noble mummies. Speaking of technology, he began to deteriorate, so in 1974 he was flown to Paris to treat a fungal infection. Who knew he would need medical treatment so far after death? Not I. Before his journey, He was issued an official Egyptian passport that listed his occupation as king deceased.
My favorite fact of this episode.
That's hilarious.
It is. Number 4.
Lady Di, wife of a marquis of the Han Dynasty. She died in the middle of the 2nd century BCE. She was overweight, had back problems, and severe gallstones. God, this sounds terrible.
I know.
All of which we know because of her excellent preservation. Her tomb was sealed with clay and charcoal, making it airtight, which is likely why she was so well preserved. She's also surrounded by a reddish liquid that may have assisted with the mummification.
All right, and number 5.
I've actually seen this mummy, so we have...
I know.
I know, he's so creepy. But it's Vladimir Lenin.
Woo!
Infamous leader of the Communist Party, his body was embalmed after his death in 1924 and put on display in Red Square. A modern take on mummification. Who'da thunk? He is re-embalmed every other year in a special solution, and utmost care is taken to deal with mold, wrinkles, and even lost eyelashes.
The details.
His maintenance costs the Russian government roughly $200,000 a year. And I'm sure all communists would agree that this is a great way to spend their hard-earned money.
I think so too.
Caroline, I'm a bit overwhelmed by the amount of information we have covered in this episode. Like, you have packed it good and tight.
As any good mummifier would.
A bit like all that salt packed in those cavernous bodies.
Exactly. This episode was so tough. I expected that I would just go into great detail about Egyptian mummification and maybe just touch on some of those other natural mummies that kind of creep up now and then. I had no idea it would take such interesting twists and turns. But I loved every minute of it, and I have left out a few absolutely fascinating nuggets that my jaw dropped, I sent text to friends, and this will all appear in our Small Bite episode later this week. So stay tuned, because the mummification, it ain't over. All right, Erica, before we finish, I have one final question for you.
Okay.
Would you ever choose to be mummified?
Well, I fully intend to be a saint later on in life, so I feel like a good mummification would be necessary.
All right, I like that. But more of like the Egyptian style mummification rather than the Peruvian.
Yeah, don't dismember me, please.
Sacrificial or dismemberment. Okay. I did find out that the state of Utah is open for mummification business.
Why?
There is a company called Sumum, which is a religious organization based in Salt Lake City. And it is the only place in the world where people and pets can be mummified. It is actually in a small pyramid, and anyone can pay for the privilege of preservation. And because I know you want to know, it is about $67,000 to become a mummy, plus an additional $20,000 to $100,000 for the fancy sarcophagus.
Well, and this fancy sarcophagus is the whole point.
Go big or go home, right? If you're already investing more than $50,000, just go all the way, people. So these modern mummies are preserved through a lack of oxygen rather than drying them out or freezing them. The embalmers are licensed funeral directors, but interestingly, there is no license needed to mummify because it is considered a religious practice.
Oh, that is so discomforting. And it feels like a little bit of cultural appropriation for this company in Salt Lake City, Utah, to build a literal pyramid and then mummify anyone whose pockets are deep enough, no religious significance necessary. And then adding the sarcophagus, even though it is aesthetic, it's just not right. But I guess to each his own, and...
I couldn't have said it better. This is weird. It is very weird. But you know what? Your body, your preservation method. You do you, folks. All right, before we sign off, I want to challenge our listeners to think about these cultures, these ancient peoples who loved and honored their families, their elders, their communities. They felt loss and pain just as we do, but had no paintings, no photos, nothing to preserve the memories of their loved ones. They missed them, and they wanted connection. Mummification gave them that opportunity. This isn't true for every culture or for every mummy, but it is a way to think about and to make mummies less scary and more sentimental. And with that, it's a wrap.
Oh, good grief, Caroline.
Thank you for joining us on this cultural dig into mummification. Please come back next week as we are celebrating Black History Month with a special episode on Sojourner Truth. Until then, I'm Caroline.
And I'm Erica. Stay pithy, y'all.
And keep the puns. This episode is brought to you by the Pithy Chronicle, LLC. The Pithy Chronicle is intended for education, entertainment, and non-commercial purposes. Any views or opinions expressed in this podcast are personal and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the owner may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity. While we offer lots of sarcasm, this podcast does not offer any advice or services. Listening to this podcast may induce fits of laughter, unexpected distraction, or uncontrollable rage at the subjects, hopefully not at us. We hope you learned something today. If not, so sorry. Please be advised we are not experts in the following fields: medical, legal, financial, technological, thermonuclear engineering, submarine warfare, neuroscience, or cat husbandry. Thanks for listening to our little disclaimer. Just covering our history-loving asses. Bye!